Risk number 4 to the economic path forward is what I call policy fumble. So let's be clear. A lot of mistakes have been made already. At the beginning of the crisis, we really didn't understand how bad it could actually get. And there was really a shortage of projections. And the first tangible projection came from Imperial College. And the projections were startling in terms of the potential death rates. It turns out that those projections didn't take into account basic information, like people changing their behavior and voluntarily social distancing. So unfortunately, a number of our policies were based upon these projections that turned out to be far too pessimistic. So again, we've made mistakes, some of them more serious than others. We are mending in terms of both the health situation and the economic situation. However, what's most important is not making further mistakes going forward. So this is all about the path forward. So let me detail about 5 things that I consider really important in terms of kind of avoiding future mistakes or fumbles. So in this context, I think we need to consider the following: that the delicate balancing of the economic costs and the health costs is really important. The cost in terms of the economics of this crisis is about $10 billion a day. So that needs to be taken into account when developing policies. So, for example, my number 1 on the list is that we need to massively fund vaccine research, development, and production. So again, think of the cost, $10 billion a day, and then think of, well, how much have we allocated to that? And what I'm talking about includes the possibility of massive production of multiple vaccines, potentially available in the fall, knowing full well that many of the vaccines will not pass the clinical trials and be discarded. Okay, so the idea here is you produce a suite of the best candidates. You make sure that we've got the doses available. The government has made some important steps with Operation Warp Speed. So this needs to be a priority. The solution to this crisis is a biological solution, and we should be actively funding that. At the beginning of this crisis, we were not in tune. We did not allocate to this type of research. There's a lot going on, over 100 vaccines in development, and we need to make sure that they are tested properly and then deployed as quickly as possible. Number 2, it would be a mistake to underinvest in testing and tracing. So we know already that that was one of the mistakes that was made early on, that insufficient funds were allocated for testing in particular. Well, we've learned from that, and we need to massively deploy funds for quick and widespread testing. And what's the reason for that? When the infections are going down? Well, the reason for that is to mitigate the risk of a second wave. So if we've got massive testing available, where people literally could be tested twice a month, that would hugely decrease the risk of a second wave being a serious impediment to the economy. if we get a second wave and we have to go and reverse some of the opening up, and some places might even be locked down again, that would throw us back into depression-like conditions. We don't need that. So we need to make the investment now for the fall. Okay, so moving beyond health, we want to avoid the European model of negative interest rates, and even worse, the Japanese model. We've seen that before. We know what happens. There's little innovation, and economic growth is stuck at, let's say, 1% or even less when you're talking about Japan. The economy's not growing, then it's really hard to dig out of the hole of all of the debt that we've taken on. So I certainly hope that our monetary authorities will, soon after growth starts again, be aggressive in putting us into an interest rate environment that is non-distortionary. And I believe negative interest rates, or things like you take out a mortgage and you're paid on a monthly basis to take it out, that's just distortionary and very bad for long-term growth. Number 4 on my list is a difficult one, and I'll have more to say about it in future episodes. And that is, our policymakers cannot act with the belief that they have an infinite line of credit. The spending that's happening right now is a simple transfer of money from the future to today. We have to pay back at some point. Maybe we can avoid it for a number of years, but we are burdening a future generation. And we are jeopardizing the chance of reattaining the growth that we enjoyed for many years in the 3% range, 3 or 4% range. Okay, so we are trading off long-term growth. So a number of people, a number of policymakers believe that we should just spend. And indeed, they look to the global financial crisis. So, well, we spent, went into deficit, had deficits for 10 years after that, and also created a lot of money with quantitative easing. And no inflation. Well, again, you've heard me say this. I am not one to extrapolate from a single observation. So this is something that we need to reckon with. You take debt, that debt needs to be paid off. It's paid off either with higher taxes, or more likely, it's paid off with inflation. Both of them are negative for economic growth. Okay, number 5 I will end with, but really number 5 is the topic of episode number 7 that I call the fire drill. And this is also a serious mistake for longer term growth. And that is that we don't learn from this pandemic. That we have the view that, it is a one-off event and it happens about every century. Look back to 1918, the Spanish flu. No. So we can't have naive expectations that another pandemic might be 100 years from now. It could be in 2 years. It could be in 5 years. And indeed, it could be far worse than the COVID-19. We need to be prepared for that. And our policymakers will make a huge blunder if they don't make the investment in both the technology to mitigate the risk of another virus and the technology to actually treat once people have a virus. So this is a serious investment in the long term to essentially reduce this obvious systemic risk that we face. It's often the case that it's difficult for policymakers to look beyond their 2-year term in Congress or their 6-year term or the 4-year term. We need, especially given what we've been through, for our policymakers to take a longer term view. We need growth. We need a vibrant economy. The economy's been shut down, and we can't afford for the economy to be shut down again.